So I spent the last week or two watching YouTube videos on how people out there are storing their router bits. And it's been, you don't really realize that you have this problem until you realize you have this problem with all your router bits. And I decided that I needed to do something to store my router bits. This is pretty much what I ended up with. What I ended up creating building were these modular shelves, and then the shelves slide out. Yeah, so the shelves just slide out, and they're on these Keener trails, these aluminum tracks. Rearrange the order of them, and if need be, I can make more. So there's a bumper on the end, so they go in like that. Here's how I made them. So the idea was to use redwood because it's light, kind of lightweight, and I have a lot of redwood scraps in my scrap collections. And then to wrap the outside of it with cherry, because cherry is more tactile and less likely to pick up a splinter. But now that they're done, I've measured again, they're about 1 3/8 by 2 5/8, so they could just been milled right out of a nice clear piece of 2x4. Here I'm going to lay out which side I'm going to have as the upside, and how deep am I going to mill out the inside of this thing so that the foam can go inside of it. So I'm just taking a measurement right off the foam there. So talking about this foam, this is, I don't know, 1/2 inch, probably a little thicker than 1/2 inch, maybe 5/8. This is 5/8 thick. It's extremely rugged foam. Foam is like really it's like really hard. It's sold. I bought it as a cheap stuff from I got some more here. This is pretty dense right here. The brown is. Now the trick to working with this foam, maybe with all kinds of foam, swim noodles or anything, is you want to cut it when it's really cold. So I'm not ready to cut that yet, but when I get ready to cut it, I want it to be really cold. So anyway, this stuff is 4 inches, so my inserts are going to be 2 inch. Here I set a stop on the chop saw, and I'm cutting to length all the blocks and the pieces of foam. I put the foam back outside to get it nice and cold in preparation for ripping it, and then I'm just going to rip it on the bandsaw. It's important to work the foam when it's ice cold like this. When it's warm, it has a lot more friction on the blade, and maybe not as big of an issue on a bandsaw, but on a circular saw, it can get picked up by the blade. And here I'm just setting the blade height to the thickness of the foam and plotting how I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to cut it symmetrical, so I'll cut it, I'll flip each piece, cut both sides, and move the fence in towards the center, and cut a series of lines, a series of cuts, and then I'm going to go and clean it all up on the router. I had the wrong bit in the router. I had a bearing bit, and I want a flat bottom bit in there, so I put a down spiral flat bottom bit in it. And then I'm just doing basically the same thing with the router fence. I have it clamped at both ends, and I move it a little bit, flip the boards to carve out the centers. So I'm starting to cut up some pieces of cardboard, rip them down to the same size as the foam, and then I'm going to also make a wood block that's the same. I did a rough layout with the cardboard just to kind of get a perspective of what it was, and then I transferred those holes to the block of wood that I was going to use to cut the foam. The idea here is to use the piece of wood as a template or a pattern, and to drill through the holes in the wood and down into the foam with a plug cutter I'm making. This is a piece of 1/4-inch brake line I bought at the Napa. It's like $2.50. Its OD is a 1/4-inch on the outside. So this is what I'm going to use to bore the holes in the foam. Here I'm chucking this thing up into a flaring tool just to get a good hold in it. I put a dowel stick into it, and the reason is if you have a dowel stick inside of it and cut it, you won't have so many burrs on the inside, like backing up a cut. I'm running the drill on slow, and I'm using the reamer to take any burrs off the inside of the tubing, and I use a flat file and some sandpaper, coarse paper, to deal with the outside. And now here I've got the tubing chucked into the drill press, and I'm just setting up the cut for the holes, and the foam is in the freezer again. So here I am about halfway through, and as I cut a hole, I'll stick a bit in the down into the foam to lock the position. It's a brad pointed bit, and I spin it backwards through those holes to mark the centers, and then I'm going to go through and drill with a 3/8" bit down into the wood. Now I'm ready to start building the trays for the 1/2" bits. As I look at this, I probably could move my holes a little closer to the outside to get a little more separation down the middle. Right on a 1/2". Actually even a little bit bigger. I couldn't find any more tubing around the shop, so I went out to a hardware store and picked up some of this brass. This one here is 1/16 of an inch less, 7/16, 1/16 less than a half. And this is 15/32 is 1/32 less. And I'll probably use this one, the bigger of the two. I wrapped the brass tubing in some painter's tape to increase the diameter so it would fit into the little holding jig that I have for dowels. And then I went ahead and cut through it and did the same process to the edges to clean up the edge, and then made some test cuts. I made a couple of cardboard patterns until I got one that I liked the best, and then I transferred a row to the wood, and then I'm going to use the wood to go ahead and drill through into the foam. That first cut hung up, so I'm going to use some coarse sandpaper and serrade the edge of the tubing so it bites a little better, and then I'm going to wax it. Cut enough foam to know that this helps. I ran the drill at the slow speed setting and pulled a coarse sandpaper over it. It kind of serrades the edge of it. So I put a little wax on the tube, and now that it's ground like that, it's cutting really good. I'm using the wooden dowels after I cut the hole to hold the positions. So I marked the ends and put the foam in there, and I'm using a brad point bit spun backwards to center all those holes. And then I counterbored the wood at 5/8 of an inch. I gave it a quick coat of hard wax oil. I like that finish because it dries really quick. I had to be a little bit careful where I was going to put the screws in, and I had to keep them kind of low so they'd be down into the meat of the bottom of this tray. And then I just pushed it up against a big block of wood so that the Keter trail would be right up flush with the top when I connected it. When I attached the slides into the cabinet, I tried to give them about a 1 degree downward slope so that they slope down towards the bumper. And then I started loading up the trays with the router bits, just kind of randomly putting them into the places. After I loaded it up, I still had some router bits, so I went ahead and made another tray. So I hope this gave you some ideas. It certainly is an upgrade for my router bit storage, and if you like it, you can put a thumbs up and subscribe.